whatever you do, don't fall asleep.
Nightmare on Elm Street is a bona fide classic in the same pantheon as The Exorcist, Psycho, and Night of the Living Dead.
Freddy certainly was a star, kind of the father figure who takes delight in killing innocents and delights in evil.
He became a character in American horror, the equal of Frankenstein and Dracula.
Just seemed like ancient tragedy in a way, so it felt very classical.
It was about the story, and it was a really, really good story.
This is a smart, interesting little movie. It deals with reality and fantasy blending.
It was one of my very first jobs at all. I didn't really know what I was getting myself into.
The scene in the bedroom where the girl is going up the wall.
Nobody's ever really done that kind of thing before.
No apologies, nothing politically correct about it. Pushing the envelope, Wes Craven, come on down.
Gonna get you.
When I try to think of where becoming a horror film director came from, I can only speculate. First of all, I never thought of making movies until I was almost 30. I was raised in a fundamentalist Baptist church. Almost all social things of any import were really within the church. And one of the beliefs they had, besides you can't play cards and dance and smoke and drink alcohol, was that you don't go to movies because they're kind of the devil's playground. My father was buried in 45, somewhere around my 6th birthday. The few memories that I have of my father, I was really scared of him. He had an explosive temper, and you had the feeling like he could kill you at any time. It was just, one of those kind of guys. My first year in college, I came down with this very strange, unexpected paralysis. And during that time, when I came fairly close to death, I started writing poetry. That and my love of books and novels started going into writing short stories and things like that, but none of them were, about horror. Films didn't really happen until I started teaching college. We had an art theater that showed all the European films, fantastic Bergman and Fellini films, this amazing sort of fluorescence of astonishing films. That was my notion, is I want to do something like that. Quit my job. I just went to New York to figure out how to make films. The whole idea of doing a horror film never would have occurred to me. Really, it just was a matter of my having been working for this guy, Sean Cunningham, who hired me to do some syncing up dailies.
Around 1970s, when I first started to make films, I really didn't know how, and I was learning how to make all of these mistakes and how to make movies. In the middle of all of that, I meet this guy named Wes Craven. He was a rock. He was a terrific assistant, and he became a really good editor. After we had worked together for almost a year, it was like, I've got an idea, let's make a movie. We were able to get some people to put up money because of our previous relationship.
Sean said, the backers want a scary movie. Did you ever think of writing something scary? I said, no. He said, well, go write something scary, and if they like it, you can direct it. On a weekend, in 3 days, I wrote Last House on the Left. Kind of a raucous, balls to the walls, escape criminals doing horrible things movie.
The picture turned out to be very, very strong. You got to see Wes's special sensitivity for this scary, dark arena.
I don't think Sean or I thought that anybody would really see it. When it opened, it kind of created a sensation, and there were riots and protests, and people tried to get into the projection booth to destroy it. I felt like, hey, maybe we got something here.
After Last House was released, Wes felt that he had his sample reel and had a kind of a hit movie.
Actually, after Last House, I didn't make another film for, I think, almost 5 years because I was trying to do other kinds of films. And then at a certain point, my friend said, I can get you money to make a scary movie, write something else scary. That became Hills Have Eyes.
The Hills Have Eyes, another sort of strange, stark, semi-horror thing which he was able to get done. And at the same time, Wes had moved to California, was trying to make his career here and got to do a couple of movies. Wes became a successful director, but he's still haunted by this idea of going back and trying to do this special movie.
Nightmare was written after I'd done 2 films back to back. I had made enough money on them to take 6 months off. So I basically took 6 months off and wrote and refined the script, Nightmare on Elm Street. Nightmare on Elm Street as a story seems to have its roots in these articles in the Los Angeles Times. The first article was about a young man, Asian descent, dying in the middle of a nightmare. He and the family had come out of relocation camps in Southeast Asia during the time of Pol Pot, when hundreds of thousands of people were just being slaughtered. About a year later, there was a second article. Then about 6 months later, the third, and the third one just got me. That was a young man whose father was a doctor. They had come out of relocation camps. He was having nightmares, and he was telling his family that there's something after me, and I'm afraid if I don't stay awake, it'll kill me. This kid decided he was going to stay awake. Sleeping pills the father had been demanding that he take were found under his pillow. He hadn't taken any of them. And he had a coffee pot in his closet full of black coffee with a long extension cord that he had hidden behind curtains. They were all sitting in the living room watching a movie, and he just kind of fell asleep. Carried him upstairs, put him to bed, pulled the covers over him, and everybody goes, thank God. Everybody goes to bed in the middle of the night. They hear screaming. They run into his room, and before they get to him, he is dead. Oh man, I got to do a movie about that.
There are so many horror films that have used the dream motif. If we go back to The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, the entire film is seen as a nightmare. They chose to make the sets distorted, expressionistic, nightmarish. But there was never a situation where a character lived exclusively in a dream world.
Since I was in college, I've been writing down dreams and remembering my dreams, so I was kind of familiar with the whole landscape. I've always felt like nightmares are the horror movies of the psyche. Conversely, horror films are kind of the nightmares of a culture. They talk about the things that our normal, rational mind or our polite society doesn't really want to bring to the dinner table. I was trying with Nightmare on Elm Street to think in archetypes. It was very much built on a system of kind of archetypical thinking and nightmares.
It was right in there that Wes started to talk to me about this character that operated in dreams and was able to cross over into real life.
Right away, I thought, you have to have an antagonist. You have to have the killer. And then it was a matter of just kind of designing him. By that time, Halloween had come out and Friday the 13th had come out, and they both were very powerful and successful films, and they had somebody in a mask. And at a certain point I thought, kill him in fire, and then he can have a mask of just scar tissue, and yet he'll be able to be articulate.
Fred Krueger, Mom! Fred Krueger!
Freddy, the name, was the name of a kid who used to beat me up quite frequently.
Where are you, Krueger?
Krueger sounded very German and reminded me of one of the big war plants in Nazi Germany, and also it was an extension of Krug, who was the lead character in Last House on the Left. Freddy's hat was exactly the hat of a man who had scared me when I was a little kid, who I think was a drunk walking down the street. He just somehow knew I was there, and he stopped and he looked right at me and just held that. It just scared the shit out of me. His sweater colors were out of an article I read in Scientific American, that these two colors were the most difficult for the human cornea or human eye to put side by side. The claws were the sort of pièce de résistance, and it was like, well, what does he have? Does he have a knife? Does he have a sickle? I think at that time we had a cat, and I just saw the cat doing this. You know, I was like, oh, yeah, right.
You want to know who Fred Krueger was? He was a filthy child murderer who killed at least 20 kids in the neighborhood.
The worst crime imaginable to me is to harm a child. The fact that he was a child murderer and a child molester was just about the most loathsome creature I could imagine on the level of what he did. The big problem was, how do you fight somebody like that? It became a matter of having a central character, Nancy, that dared to go into the nightmares, go into his territory. That's when I started poking around lucid dreaming and that concept that you can go into a dream and be awake. And I just invented this little conceit that if you were holding something when you woke up, it would come with you back into your reality.
I brought something out from my dream.
I would tell it in about a minute, and people would go, oh, I'd go see that in a second.
In the early 80s, I think Wes had his first draft of the script, and the agent had shopped it around. Most people just said, I don't know if it'll work. I just don't you have anything else? The only person that believed in it was Bob Shea. Bob was running New Line Pictures, which I think at the time was a 16mm distribution company.
At that time, Bob Shea and New Line Cinema were a tiny little, almost a storefront in lower Manhattan. That wasn't who I wanted to, make the movie for 10 cents, so it went around to Hollywood too, but nobody got it except Bob.
I said I thought that sounded fantastic because it had an element that I'm always looking for, which is something that all audiences can relate to, and everybody, of course, could relate to: scary dreams and nightmares.
Bob absolutely believed that Wes was onto something, and he wanted a shot at the big time. The bad news is Bob didn't have any money. He spent months and months, if not years, trying to get the money together to shoot this movie.
with great pain and suffering, I will tell you that. As much the pain and suffering you go through making a film is nowhere near the pain and suffering you go through financing it. In this case, I had to raise all the money outside.
He raised the money basically, I'm sure, from his own money, and I'm sure from friends and family. And then he was looking for the major investor. Smart Egg was going to advance him $1 million for the picture. A week later, he called me and said they dropped out.
Just about 2 weeks before we started shooting, he basically said, "You guys should all just go home and I'll call you if I find money." And it was like, oh man, so close, you know.
Bob told me, go back to LA and tell everyone that they're going to have to just work for free for a while. John Burroughs, our line producer, put up his own money.
I'll use my credit card and I'll pay the crew. It was like $8,000 or $9,000.
I remember at that time, Bob has a thing about fingernails and kind of digging at them, and I looked over and they were all just bloody, and I realized the incredible amount of stress that comes from raising money and trying to get back into a picture. Somehow he found the money.
We had one final meeting with Media Home Entertainment, a guy named Joe Wolf who owned that company, and they were big home video distributors. Finally made a deal where Joe Wolf could take over the whole movie if I didn't get my commitment together in 3 or 4 weeks. I managed to go to the Smart Egg guy and browbeat him into agreeing to put up the last few $100,000.
Bob didn't like it, but he had to take it. He was stuck. We went ahead and made the picture, but Bob will always remember that he was really giving his blood. You know, he said, "John, I hate it, I hate it, I hate it." The casting director was Annette Benson. She started bringing in people for Wes to talk to.
You know, you make a lot of decisions when you start off on a film in casting that you're going to be married to, and if you make one wrong decision, it can just kill the film. Nancy was played by this young woman who walked into the casting office, Heather Langenkamp. There was just nothing pretentious about her, but she was smart. She had an open face. She had a strong face.
I remember the interview really well because it was the scene where I'm describing how my dream had this guy in it with fingernails, and I remember, you know, making that sound.
Nancy.
I remember looking at Wes, and I could tell he really liked it.
He knew immediately that Heather was the right look, because he wanted a young girl who was smart looking, obviously pretty, vulnerable, but clearly had a good head on her shoulders.
I'm into survival.
The character that I love the most and have identified with the most is Nancy Thompson. She had a great sense that she could solve problems without anybody's help at all. I try to be like her, actually. Nancy definitely was this good girl, and her best friend, Tina, you get the feeling like she just isn't going to make it.
When Wes cast me as Tina, I just completed my acting program. My agents at the time called and said, "You have an audition for this horror film." The thought behind it was that I'd be the sort of Janet Leigh character, and in the first couple scenes of the film you would think that I was going to be the heroine.
That was obviously his lead. It was going to be his heroine. You found out a lot about her, and then you killed her.
The device shown just to make it clear that I'm not going to be the heroine. Obviously when I die, that's a clear indicator.
Rob was played by Nick Corey.
Guys can have nightmares too, you know.
He was a very interesting actor. He had a lot of soul, I thought, and a lot of empathy.
I probably could have saved if I'd have moved sooner.
He felt like he could play a character who wasn't a bad guy, but he hadn't had the breaks that everybody else had had.
Johnny Depp had never acted, and Wes liked him and liked his look.
Hi, how you doing?
It came down to 3 guys. Johnny Depp was one, and there was just a name. I said, well, I'm thinking of this guy, which is not Johnny, and my daughter and her friend said, "Dad, Johnny Depp." Oh, he's sexy. He's so sexy. He's a dreamboat.
Sexy and hot and good-looking.
His was a little bit more of a goody two-shoes character than I'm sure he was in real life. You know, he played such a pure as the driven snow kind of guy.
Why would anybody want to kill me?
Johnny had never been, to my knowledge, in front of a camera before.
I won't screw up.
He was just terrified that he wasn't doing a good job.
Woo!
You know, after we were shooting a while, I said, "Johnny, you're doing great."
One of the conditions when we got the rest of our money was that we needed to have a name, at least a name or two, so that we could sell the